Most people think Nazi Germany was on the verge of building weapons so advanced they could change the course of history overnight. Secret machines, hidden bunkers, technology decades ahead of its time, but the truth is more complicated and in some ways more unsettling. Because some of those weapons were very real, and they did not need to be science fiction to be terrifying. By the final years of World War II, Nazi Germany was collapsing on nearly every front. In the east, the Red Army was driving toward Germany with overwhelming force. In the west, Allied armies had landed in France and were pushing across Europe. In the skies, British and American bombers were hammering German cities, rail yards, fuel plants, and factories. The war machine that had once seemed unstoppable was breaking apart. And as the situation grew more desperate, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi leadership placed more and more hope in what they called Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons. Weapons so advanced, they believed they might shock the Allies, reverse the momentum, and save the Third Reich from destruction. To the Nazi leadership, these weapons became more than military projects. They became symbols of hope, propaganda tools, proof that Germany still possessed some hidden advantage, even as the war was clearly being lost. And that is part of what makes this story so fascinating. Some of these weapons were propaganda, some were failures, some arrived too late to matter, but others were genuine breakthroughs that changed the future of warfare forever. One of the most significant was the V-2 rocket. This was not just another missile. It was the world's first long-range, guided ballistic weapon used in combat. Developed at the German research facility at Peenemünde, the V-2 represented a technological leap unlike anything seen before. It was designed by a team of engineers led by Wernher von Braun, a young rocket scientist whose work would later become central to the American space program. The V-2 stood over 45 feet tall. It burned liquid oxygen and alcohol. It climbed high into the atmosphere, reached speeds faster than sound, and then fell toward its target with almost no warning. There was no effective defense against it. No fighter could intercept it. No anti-aircraft gun could shoot it down. By the time people heard the explosion, the rocket had already struck. For the first time in history, war had reached beyond the atmosphere. But the story of the V-2 is not just a story of engineering, it is also a story of human suffering. After Allied bombing raids damaged Peenemünde, production was moved underground to the Mittelwerk factory in central Germany. There, prisoners from the nearby Dora concentration camp were forced to build rockets in horrific conditions. They worked underground for long hours with little food, poor air, and brutal treatment. Thousands died from exhaustion, starvation, disease, and abuse. In one of the darkest facts of the entire program, more people died building the V-2 than were killed by the rocket attacks themselves. That is the part often left out when the V-2 is remembered only as a stepping stone to space exploration. Yes, the rocket helped shape the future. Yes, Wernher von Braun would later work for the United States and help develop the Saturn V rocket that sent astronauts to the moon. But the roots of that achievement run through underground tunnels, forced labor, and the final brutality of the Nazi war machine. At the same time that rockets were changing the meaning of long-range warfare, something else was taking to the skies. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the first operational jet fighter. To Allied pilots used to propeller-driven aircraft, the Me 262 seemed to come from the future. It was fast, sleek, and heavily armed. In level flight, it could outrun the best Allied fighters. Its speed gave German pilots a major advantage when attacking bomber formations. For crews inside American B-17S and B-24S, the sight of a Me 262 closing in must have been terrifying. It could appear quickly, fire its cannons, and disappear before escorts could respond. But once again, revolutionary technology did not equal victory. The Me 262 had serious problems. Its jet engines were advanced, but they were unreliable and had short service lives. Germany lacked the high-quality metals needed to make them durable. Fuel shortages meant many jets could not fly regularly. Allied bombing damaged production sites, airfields, and supply lines. And politics made the problem worse. Hitler became fixated on using the Me 262 as a bomber, hoping it could strike Allied forces and slow their advance. Many Luftwaffe officers wanted it used primarily as a fighter, where its speed could be most effective. The debate delayed its full impact. By the time that the Me 262 appeared in meaningful numbers, Germany no longer had the pilots, fuel, industry, or time to use it properly. The jet age had arrived, but it had arrived inside a collapsing regime. Then there was the V-1 flying bomb, crude, loud, unpredictable, and terrifying. The V-1 was essentially an early cruise missile. It had short wings, a pulse jet engine, and a simple guidance system that allowed it to fly toward a target area. It was launched from ramps or aircraft and sent towards cities, especially London and later Antwerp. People called it the buzz bomb because of the harsh, pulsing sound of its engine. That sound became part of the terror. As long as the engine was buzzing, people knew the weapon was still moving. But when the sound stopped, it meant the V-1 had begun to fall, and those nearby had only seconds to live. Unlike the V-2, the V-1 could sometimes be intercepted. Fighter pilots learned to shoot them down or even tip them off course with their wings. Anti-aircraft guns and barrage balloons were also used against them. But the psychological effect was enormous. The V-1 did not have to be precise to create fear. It was a weapon designed as much to terrorize civilian populations as to destroy military targets. And like the V-2, it reflected the changing nature of modern war. Distance no longer guaranteed safety. Cities far from the front lines could be attacked by machines launched from hundreds of miles away. On the ground, Germany also pursued massive weapons that seemed almost medieval in scale. One of the most famous was the Schwerer Gustav railway gun. It was one of the largest artillery pieces ever built. So large that it had to be transported by rail. So complex that it required an enormous crew and extensive preparation just to fire. Its shells were massive, its range was impressive. And as a symbol of German engineering, it was extraordinary. But as a practical weapon, it was deeply flawed. It was slow to move, difficult to hide, vulnerable to air attack, and useful only in very specific siege conditions. The Gustav gun showed one of the contradictions of the Nazi weapons program. The regime could produce astonishing machines. But astonishing did not always mean useful. Sometimes bigger was not better. Sometimes it was just wasteful. Beneath the ocean, however, German engineers were developing something far more consequential. The Type XXI U-boat. Earlier submarines were really surface vessels that could dive temporarily. They spent much of their time on the surface and submerged mainly to attack or escape. The Type XXI was different. It was designed to operate underwater as its natural environment. It had a streamlined hull, more powerful batteries, improved underwater speed, and a snorkel system that allowed it to run diesel engines while submerged near the surface. It could stay hidden longer and move faster underwater than earlier U-boats. In many ways, it was the first true modern submarine. Had it been deployed earlier and in large numbers, it could have posed a serious threat to Allied shipping. But again, the timing was fatal for Germany. The Type XXI was rushed into production under chaotic conditions. Sections were built in different factories and assembled elsewhere. Quality control suffered. Training crews took time, and by the time the war ended, only a handful were operational. Its battlefield impact was minimal. Its historical impact was enormous. After the war, the design influenced both American and Soviet submarine development. The future of underwater warfare had been glimpsed in the final months of Nazi Germany. There was also the Horten Ho 229, a strange-looking flying wing aircraft that still looks modern today. Its smooth shape and jet-powered design have led many people to call it an early stealth aircraft. That claim is often overstated. The Ho 229 was experimental. It never became an operational combat aircraft. But it shows how far German engineers were willing to push aircraft design during the war. The idea of a jet-powered flying wing was real. The surviving prototype and later reconstructions helped fuel decades of speculation. To modern eyes, it looks like something that belongs in the Cold War, not World War II. And that is where the line between reality and myth begins to blur. By 1945, the real weapons were already pushing the limits of what ordinary people believed possible. Rockets were reaching the edge of space, jets were outrunning propeller aircraft, submarines were being redesigned to live underwater. Experimental aircraft looked like they had been pulled from the future. To civilians, soldiers, and even intelligence officers, it could feel as if Germany had been hiding impossible technology. After the war, Allied forces rushed to capture German scientists, documents, prototypes, and research facilities. The United States launched Operation Paperclip, bringing many German scientists and engineers to America. The Soviet Union conducted its own effort to seize technology and personnel. The race to claim Nazi research became part of the opening chapter of the Cold War. And in that atmosphere, rumors spread easily. There were missing documents, destroyed facilities, unfinished underground complexes, scientists who disappeared into American or Soviet programs, and a public that already knew Germany had built rockets, jets, and weapons no one had seen before. It was the perfect environment for legends. One of the most important real places tied to those legends was Project Riese. Project Riese means Project Giant. It was a vast underground construction effort in the Al Mountains of Lower Silesia, in what is now Poland. The complex included tunnels, chambers, rail access points, and unfinished underground spaces. It was also connected in public imagination to Książ Castle, a massive castle in the region that the Nazis had modified during the war. The exact purpose of Project Riese remains debated. Some historians believe it may have been intended as a military headquarters. Others believe it was meant for underground weapons production, protected from Allied bombing. It may have been a combination of both. What is not debated is the human cost. The construction relied heavily on forced labor, including prisoners from the Gross Rosen concentration camp system. They worked in brutal conditions, carving tunnels into rock with inadequate food, poor shelter, and constant violence. Many died. The tunnels were never completed, and because the project was unfinished, partially destroyed, and poorly documented, it became a magnet for speculation. Where records were missing, stories filled the gap. Where tunnels ended without explanation, people imagined hidden rooms. Where the Nazis had built real underground facilities, later writers imagined secret laboratories. And into that space came one of the most famous legends of all, Die Glocke, the bell. According to the legend, Die Glocke was a bell-shaped device built by Nazi scientists in the final years of the war. Depending on the version of the story, it was said to involve exotic energy, anti-gravity, time manipulation, or strange substances like Zerum 525. Some versions connected to Project Riese, others connected to secret SS research programs. The story is dramatic, it is mysterious, and it fits perfectly into the idea that Nazi Germany was hiding technology beyond anything the Allies understood. But from a historical perspective, the problem is simple. There is no credible evidence that Die Glocke existed, no verified primary documents, no confirmed prototype, no reliable chain of evidence, no physical remains that can be tied to such a device. The story was popularized decades after the war, long after the actual collapse of the Third Reich. That does not mean every person who repeats the story is trying to deceive anyone. It means the legend grew in the same way many historical myths grow. A real setting, a real regime known for secrecy, real advanced weapons, real underground construction, and enough missing information to let imagination do the rest. The same pattern appears in stories about Nazi UFOs. Names like Haunebu and Vril appear in books, television shows, and online discussions. They are often described as flying saucers developed by secret Nazi groups, sometimes linked to occult ideas or advanced propulsion systems. But again, historians find no solid evidence for operational Nazi flying saucers. What did exist were experimental aircraft, unusual designs, jet engines, rockets, and a post-war culture fascinated by UFOs and Cold War secrecy. The myth took real ingredients and arranged them into something far more dramatic. That is the key to understanding these stories without becoming a conspiracy channel. The myths are historically interesting, not because they prove secret super science existed, but because they show how people process uncertainty. When a regime leaves behind advanced weapons, destroyed records, underground tunnels, and captured scientists, people look for a bigger explanation. They want the missing piece. They want the hidden answer. They want to believe that somewhere, buried in a tunnel or locked in a classified archive, there is a secret that explains everything. But history is usually messier than that. The real story is powerful enough on its own. Nazi Germany did create weapons that pushed technology forward in ways the world had never seen. The V-2 became the foundation of modern rocketry. The Me-262 helped usher in the jet age. The Type XXI shaped post-war submarine design. The V-1 foreshadowed cruise missiles. The Ho-229 showed the possibilities of radical aircraft design. These were not myths. They were real. But they were not miracles. They were not war-winning, and they were not enough. By the time many of these weapons appeared, Germany had already lost the strategic war. Its cities were being bombed, its fuel supply was collapsing, its armies were retreating. Its industry was under constant attack, its leadership was increasingly disconnected from reality. Wonder weapons could kill, they could terrify, they could influence the future, but they could not repair the broken foundation of the Nazi war effort. In the end, the so-called wonder weapons revealed something far more important than secret power. They revealed desperation, a collapsing regime chasing breakthroughs that arrived too late, and at a cost measured in human lives. Tens of thousands of forced laborers and concentration camp prisoners suffered and died building the rockets, tunnels, factories, and machines that Nazi leaders hoped would save them. That is the part often overshadowed by stories of futuristic technology and hidden devices. The true legacy of the Wunderwaffe is not one of supernatural science. It is a reminder that innovation, when divorced from humanity, can become another instrument of suffering. And maybe that is why the myths still survive. Because the real story already feels impossible. Rockets before the space age, jets before the modern Air Force, submarines ahead of their time, underground complexes whose full purpose remains debated. The facts are dramatic enough, but where facts end, legends begin. Sometimes the most enduring stories are not about what was real. They are about what was never fully explained. And sometimes the parts left out are what keep the story alive.